Hello, I'm Stephen Howard Johnson. In this video series, I invite you to join me in exploring a very exciting and cool question. What does it take for America to become a truly competent nation? I have a solid approach to offer you, but it still needs testing. So think of this as a rough cut version. I seek the feedback of friends and strangers, and with your help, I can make the next round even more polished and get the storyline even better. In this opening video, I ask a tough question. Is America headed now for a competent future, or is America headed now for a future of mediocrity? Pervasive, chronic, systemic mediocrity. And to help provide a preliminary answer to that question, I offer 4 sets of numbers. These numbers paint a worrisome picture of widespread mediocrity. Mediocrity may not have been our intention, but our performance tells me that mediocrity has been the result we have ended up with in one area of our American life after another. Let's start with the employment numbers. Does the American economy deliver full employment? Look at U.S. unemployment from 1929 to 2011. Unemployment peaks in 1933 at 12.8 million. In 2010, unemployment peaked at 14.8 million, 2 million people more out of work in 2010 than were put out of work by the Great Depression in the 1930s. Yes, the workforce is much larger, and no, the percentage isn't nearly as high, but ours is an economy that ought to be keeping people at work. If America were a truly competent nation, would millions and millions of Americans be out of work? Now to the nation's labor market. Does America have a labor market that treats the American people equitably? We can answer the question about labor market equity by looking at new income and how it gets divided between Americans in the lower 9/10 and Americans in the top 10th. We do that, we see that for the first 7 presidential administrations after the World War, the lower 9/10 capture about 2/3 of the new growth, and those in the top 10th capture about 1/3. That's a fairly equitable division. Then there's a dramatic shift in how the economy operates, and especially in how the nation's labor market operates. Suddenly the top 10th are much more powerful, and they capture much more of the economy's new income, 60% on average from the Reagan administration forward. And Americans in the lower 9/10 are much less powerful, and they capture only about 40% of the new growth that the economy is generating. Equity in the United States was in good shape for 7 presidential administrations. Labor market equity in the United States has been in rather poor shape since Ronald Reagan was president. It is not a harbinger of a competent nation if you extend the current trend forward into the future. Now to the third question. Is America competent enough to keep its medical sector affordable by any reasonable international comparison? One good way to understand medical spending in the United States is to compare the amount we spend here per person per year with the amount spent per person per year in other countries. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, has more than 30 member nations. I have selected 22 of them, including the United States, to compare annual spending per person across all these nations and see how America stands versus the rest. Their statisticians equate a dollar is spent in each country with the same dollar spent in other countries. So $1,000 spent on medicine in the United States is equivalent to $1,000 spent on medicine elsewhere, in terms of the purchasing power of the dollar, not necessarily in terms of the amount of care you get for it. Look at the chart that develops as we pull out these numbers. There are 2 nations, Israel and New Zealand, that spend between $2,000 and $3,000 per year per capita on medicine. There are 11 nations that spend between $3,000 and $4,000 per year. Japan, Spain, Italy, Finland, the UK, Iceland, Australia, Sweden, Ireland, Belgium, and France. There are 6 more nations that spend between $4,000 and $5,000 per year per person: Germany, Austria, Denmark, Canada, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands.
There are two nations that spend a bit over $5,000 per year, Switzerland and Norway. And if you're looking at the chart, you can see that in the United States in 2009, we spent just about $8,000 per person per year on medicine. Miles and miles and miles more expensive here to buy medical care than it is anywhere else in the world. It is not a mark of America's competence that we overspend $1 trillion a year on medicine compared with everybody else in the world. Now to the fourth question. Is the U.S. Congress fiscally responsible? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that our Congress was once fiscally responsible, believe it or not. The bad news is that it's been quite some time since our Congresses have been behaving with the fiscal responsibility that used to be their trademark. Look now at Congress' fiscal track record. We start with the 26 years following World War II, 47 to 72, and we see just admirable fiscal restraint. There were 8 years of budget surpluses, 10 years with deficits below 1% of GDP, 4 more years with deficits between 1 and 2%, and 4 years beyond that with deficits between 2 and 3%. There were no deficits that exceeded 3%. Congress got the gross federal debt down from almost 120% of GDP at the beginning of this time period to only about 36% of GDP at the end of this time period. It was a tremendous period of fiscal accomplishment and fiscal responsibility, but something happened in America that allowed this sense of responsibility to dissipate and be replaced by a sense of irresponsibility on the part of both political parties. And we see the record changing dramatically as we go forward from 1973. Only 4 years in surplus, only 2 years with deficits below 1% of GDP, 6 years with deficits between 1 and 2%, 8 years with deficits between 2 and 3%, 9 years with deficits between 3 and 4, 6 more years with deficits between 4 and 6, and 4 years beyond that with deficits exceeding 6% of GDP. National debt has shot back up again. It's up to about 100% of GDP. In this video series, we tackle cool and exciting questions. What will it take for the American people to become a truly competent public? What will it take for America to become a truly competent nation? Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you next time. Take care.